Banned from their weddings. I uninvited them from mine, then dropped the mic. That wasn't just a headline for my future memoir. It was the raw, burning manifesto, forged in the crucible of years of deliberate familial exclusion. The pristine ivory invitation to my cousin Sarah's wedding lay on my coffee table, a cruel joke in thick, embossed script. It wasn't merely a piece of paper. It was a gauntlet thrown, a final, taunting reminder of every family milestone I'd been systematically erased from. My Nashville apartment, usually a sanctuary of fierce independence, suddenly felt like a cage, vibrating with the silent echoes of past betrayals. This time, however, the echo would reverberate back on them with a force they wouldn't soon forget. The time for quiet suffering was over. The time for surgical, devastating counterstrike had arrived. The first incision had been Michael's wedding. I was 22, still naive enough to believe blood truly meant something, still clinging to the fairy tale of unconditional family love. Fresh out of journalism school, brimming with an idealism that bordered on recklessness, I'd already ruffled feathers with a few local exposes. Nothing scandalous, just truth-telling, which to Aunt Sylvia was far worse. Her voice, a syrupy blend of condescension and thinly veiled malice, had filtered through my mother's strained whispers. "Harper, darling, Michael's big day. It needs to be perfect. And with your unconventional career choices, your mother and I, we just feel it might be best if you abstained." Abstain, as if I were a moral pollutant, a volatile substance that could spontaneously combust at the sight of a white dress. Michael, caught between his matriarchal terror and genuine love for his sister, offered a hollow apology that tasted like ash. "I'm so sorry, Harp. Aunt Sylvia was just insistent." Insistent. That word, a velvet hammer, had been Aunt Sylvia's preferred tool for chipping away at my existence within the family. I was a troublemaker, a rattlesnake in the garden, a drama magnet, each label a fresh wound, festering into a core of bitter defiance. Then came David's wedding, 2 years later. By then, my journalism had escalated from local ripples to national waves, my byline synonymous with unflinching investigations into corporate greed and political corruption. My work, which commanded respect in my professional sphere, only solidified Aunt Sylvia's conviction that I was an untamed beast, unfit for polite society. The whispers metastasized, morphing into outright declarations of my unsuitability. "She simply can't behave," Aunt Sylvia would lament, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry across crowded rooms at family gatherings I was still, inexplicably, allowed to attend. So much intensity. Why can't she be more like her cousin's quiet, compliant, normal? Normal. The word was a branding iron, searing my skin with the mark of an outsider. David's opulent Sonoma wedding, splashed across social media feeds I couldn't escape, was a public spectacle of my non-existence. Every smiling group photo, every toast, every celebratory embrace served as a stark digital billboard screaming my ostracism. It wasn't just absence. It was an active erasure, a calculated statement that my presence was a stain they simply couldn't tolerate. The pain had long since passed the point of tears. It had calcified into a diamond-hard resolve. For years, I'd endured their subtle slights, their outright snubs, their condescending pity. I'd sent the polite cards, offered the empty congratulations, swallowed the bitter pills of unspoken judgment. I'd told myself it didn't matter, that their opinion was irrelevant, that my identity wasn't tied to their approval. But the truth was, every exclusion, every dismissive glance left its mark. It gnawed at the edges of my self-worth, pushing me further into the solitary pursuit of my career. I built walls of professional success, but the foundation was still laid on a bedrock of familial rejection. I became sharper, colder, more uncompromising in my work, driven by an unspoken fury that sought to prove my worth on my own terms. I would expose their hypocrisy, one article at a time, if that's what it took. It was in this hardened landscape that Mark appeared, a photojournalist. He saw not the rattlesnake, but the woman beneath the armor, the fierce integrity, the profound empathy, the quiet ache of a heart that still longed for connection. He loved the parts of me the family scorned, cherished the intensity they feared. When he proposed, beneath a sky blazing with a California sunset, my yes was immediate, ecstatic, but even as his ring glittered on my finger, a second, equally potent thought surged through me. My wedding, my rules, Aunt Sylvia, Uncle Jeff, the entire self-appointed tribunal of familial judgment. They wouldn't just be uninvited. Their absence would be a resounding statement. This wasn't about bitterness. It was about reclaiming my narrative, about turning their weaponized exclusion into my ultimate act of empowerment. The chessboard was no longer theirs. I was ready to make my move. My family, the Lees, had always been defined by a curated image of Southern gentility and unimpeachable respectability. Not old money, but certainly old values, or rather, old pretenses. Growing up in a suburb of Atlanta, I was the anomaly, the one who saw through the veneer, the one who asked too many questions. Even as a child, while my cousins were mastering the art of polite small talk and acceptable ambitions, I was dissecting newspaper articles, sketching courtroom dramas, and devouring biographies of investigative journalists. My parents, bless their hearts, were caught in the crossfire. They loved me, I knew, but they also deeply valued familial harmony, a peace meticulously maintained by the iron fist in Aunt Sylvia's velvet glove. Aunt Sylvia, my father's eldest sister, was the undisputed monarch of the Lee clan. She possessed a formidable will, a razor-sharp tongue she wielded with surgical precision, and an almost pathological obsession with public perception. She believed that the family was a meticulously crafted sculpture, and every member had a designated place, a prescribed pose. My very existence, it seemed, was a chisel striking against her masterpiece. Uncle Jeff, her husband, was her silent partner, a man of few words but profound, unwavering support for Sylvia's agenda. He'd nod, murmur agreement, or, on rare occasions, deliver a cutting remark that, because it came from him, somehow landed with more weight than Sylvia's flamboyant pronouncements. They were a formidable, chillingly effective duo, presiding over family gatherings like judges over a court, their approval a coveted, often unattainable prize. My troublemaker reputation began subtly. I was the child who questioned the historical inaccuracies in holiday stories, the teenager who debated politics at Thanksgiving dinner, the young woman who chose a journalism degree over something sensible, like law or business. My first real clash with Aunt Sylvia wasn't a grand confrontation, but a series of small, undermining remarks. I remember a Christmas dinner. Just before I left for college, I was excitedly describing my plans to major in investigative journalism. My eyes bright with the prospect of uncovering truths. Aunt Sylvia, delicately dabbing her lips with a linen napkin, had interjected, "Darling, isn't that a rather messy profession? All those unpleasant people and situations. Perhaps something more refined, like public relations, where you can manage the narrative rather than disrupt it." The word disrupt hung in the air, a thinly veiled accusation. Uncle Jeff had merely grunted, a sound that in his vocabulary meant, "I concur." It wasn't a banishment then, but a clear, chilling warning. As my career progressed, so did their disapproval. My early articles, even local ones, were always about uncovering something hidden, challenging a status quo. This directly contradicted Aunt Sylvia's philosophy of maintaining appearances at all costs. She viewed my work not as a pursuit of truth, but as a deliberate act of airing dirty laundry, of making things uncomfortable. My willingness to shine a light on uncomfortable truths was seen as a personal affront to their tightly controlled, perfectly polished world. I wasn't just exposing corruption. I was exposing them, or at least the kind of world they wished to inhabit, one where inconvenient facts were swept under the rug. The family phone calls became less frequent, more strained. Invitations to smaller family gatherings, like Sunday brunches or casual anniversaries, started drying up. It was a slow, insidious fade-out, not an abrupt cut. When I'd inquire, my mother would offer vague excuses about scheduling conflicts or a small, intimate gathering. I wasn't stupid. I knew. Aunt Sylvia was systematically excising me, bit by bit, from the family tapestry. She was the weaver, and I, the rogue thread, was being snipped away. Uncle Jeff, meanwhile, would occasionally call my father, his voice laden with concern, to discuss Harper's latest antics. He'd never speak to me directly about it, always through an intermediary, which only amplified the sense of my being a problem to be managed, not a person to be understood. This constant undercurrent of disapproval and subtle rejection created a profound chasm between me and the rest of the family. I became acutely aware of my otherness. While my cousins shared stories of quiet corporate jobs and suburban domesticity, I was traversing state lines for interviews, digging through public records, confronting sources. My world grew exponentially, filled with vibrant, complex people who valued honesty and grit. Their world, in contrast, seemed to shrink, bound by social graces and unspoken rules. It was a constant psychological battle to remain authentic to myself, to my journalistic principles, while simultaneously aching for the acceptance of the people I was biologically tied to. The wedding banns, then, weren't sudden acts of malice. They were the inevitable culmination of years of escalating tension, the logical conclusion of Aunt Sylvia's relentless campaign to manage me. Michael's and David's weddings were merely the public, undeniable proof that I had been fully cast out. The pain wasn't just about missing a party. It was the raw, visceral understanding that I was truly, irrevocably, an outsider to my own blood. It was the realization that their love, if it ever existed for me, was conditional. Conditional on my silence, my conformity, my subservience to their manufactured reality. This deep-seated exclusion, rather than breaking me, forged me. It made me tougher, more resilient, and utterly unapologetic about who I was. When Mark entered my life, he saw the strength born from that adversity, the unyielding spirit that refused to be dimmed. He admired my sharp mind, my commitment to truth, my refusal to be anyone but myself. He didn't try to fix my family dynamic. He simply created a new, accepting space with me. His love wasn't conditional. It was expansive, inclusive. It was the stark contrast between his world and theirs that crystallized my resolve. Their cold, calculating rejections had inadvertently given me a powerful weapon, the ability to wield my own acceptance, or lack thereof, with precision. The uninvitation wasn't just a response, it was the ultimate act of self-definition, a declaration that my worth was no longer up for debate, and certainly not dependent on their fragile approval. My wedding wouldn't be a day for compromise. It would be a triumph of authenticity. The period leading up to our wedding was supposed to be a whirlwind of joyous anticipation, a delightful chaos of venue tours, cake tastings, and dress fittings. Instead, for me, it became a slow, deliberate act of emotional triage, a painful but necessary culling of a past that refused to relinquish its hold. Mark, bless his endlessly patient soul, watched with quiet understanding as I meticulously planned not just the details of our future, but the precise moment of my liberation from their toxic orbit. The concept of uninviting wasn't a sudden, vengeful impulse. It was the final, logical step in a decade-long process of emotional amputation. The last, agonizing cut came barely 6 months before our own wedding, a betrayal so sharp it momentarily stripped away my carefully constructed armor, leaving me raw and exposed. It was my cousin Chloe's bridal shower. Chloe was 10 years my junior, a sweet, impressionable girl I'd always felt a quiet fondness for, a sense of protectiveness even, growing up. I'd been the only one who truly listened to her nascent dreams, who encouraged her artistic leanings when Aunt Sylvia dismissed them as frivolous. Chloe was the quiet observer, the one who would often give me a sympathetic glance when Aunt Sylvia's barbs landed particularly hard. I genuinely believed we had a bond, a thread of understanding that transcended the family's rigid hierarchy. I'd received the formal wedding invitation months prior, a victory in itself. I thought, a tentative sign that perhaps the ice was finally melting. But the bridal shower, traditionally an intimate affair hosted by the bride's closest female relatives, was a different story. I heard about it through a casual mention from my mother, weeks before the date. "Oh, Chloe's shower is next weekend," she'd said, almost as an afterthought, her gaze skittering away from mine. "Aunt Sylvia is hosting it at the club." My stomach dropped. I hadn't received an invitation, no email, no card, nothing. My mother's eyes, usually so guarded, held a flicker of genuine regret, a pathetic attempt to conceal the truth she couldn't voice. "Oh, Harper, I just assumed. Perhaps it got lost in the mail." The flimsy excuse hung in the air, a transparent shroud over the glaring omission. I knew it hadn't gotten lost. Not with Aunt Sylvia's meticulous, almost obsessive, event planning. This was deliberate. This was personal. This was a targeted strike directly at the heart of our supposed kinship. The realization hit me with a sickening thud. They weren't just excluding me from the grand spectacle of the wedding itself, where my absence might be less conspicuous, easily attributed to a busy schedule. They were cutting me out of the intimate, familial rituals, the rites of passage that cemented bonds, the moments of quiet, feminine celebration. This was Aunt Sylvia's ultimate power play, not just to banish me from the public eye, but to systematically erase me from the very fabric of family life, to render me non-existent even in the quiet, supportive moments that defined sisterhood and kinship. My previous exclusions felt like formal pronouncements. This felt like an insidious, slow-acting poison, designed to make me question my very right to belong anywhere. The wound was deeper, more precise. I tried, desperately, to rationalize it. Maybe it was just an oversight. Maybe Chloe, caught between her mother and me, had succumbed to pressure. But the thought of Chloe, my sweet, timid cousin, being forced to exclude me, twisted a knife in my gut. It wasn't just my pain. It was the sickening realization of the insidious influence Aunt Sylvia wielded, twisting innocent relationships to serve her own agenda of control. I felt a profound sorrow for Chloe, for the unspoken constraints she lived under, for the truth she couldn't speak, and for me, for the part of me that still craved that familial warmth, that easy camaraderie. It was a profound ache that settled deep in my bones, confirming the depth of their disdain. A few days later, the oversight was brutally clarified. My phone rang. It was Aunt Sylvia. Her voice, usually dripping with false pleasantries, was clipped, almost triumphant, a thinly veiled sneer. "Harper, darling," she purred, the sweetness more venomous than any shout. "I understand there's been some confusion regarding Chloe's shower. I just wanted to be perfectly clear. It's a very intimate affair. Strictly family. You understand? Immediate family. And given recent events And your unique professional commitments. We felt it best to keep the guest list very, very selective. No hard feelings, I'm sure. My unique professional commitments, the thinly veiled insult to my career, tossed in as a casual aside, was a masterstroke of passive aggression, designed to dismiss my life's work as a childish hobby. And immediate family, my father's sister, my blood. But in her warped perception, I was less than immediate. I was an outlier, a contaminant, a pariah. My hand tightened around the phone, my knuckles white with suppressed fury, my throat constricted, choked by the sheer audacity. For a split second, the old, desperate Harper, the one who craved acceptance, yearned to lash out, to plead, to demand to be seen, to be acknowledged. But then, a quiet, furious calm settled over me. No hard feelings. I'm sure, the sheer, unadulterated gall. She was enjoying this, reveling in her power, twisting the knife further, ensuring I knew my place, or rather, my absolute lack of one. The conversation was brief, stilted on my end, ending with a saccharine, "We'll send photos," from Aunt Sylvia before she disconnected, leaving me in a chilling silence. I stood there, the silence in my apartment suddenly deafening, heavier than before. The phantom sting in my chest was no longer phantom. It was real, a sharp, burning pain, a tangible manifestation of years of emotional abuse. But it wasn't just hurt. It was a cold, pure rage. Not a hot, blinding fury, but a focused, crystalline anger that sharpened my resolve, etching it into my very soul. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about drawing a final, unwavering line in the sand, about refusing to let their toxicity poison any more relationships, any more moments of joy, any more lives. Their calculated cruelty had reached its zenith, and in doing so, they had unwittingly given me the final, unassailable justification for my own calculated retaliation. Mark walked in shortly after, his brow furrowed with concern as he took in my rigid posture, the distant look in my eyes. He didn't need to ask. He simply put his arms around me, a silent anchor in my storm. "They did it again, didn't they?" he murmured, his voice gentle but firm, resonating with a shared understanding of my pain and their malice. I nodded, leaning into his warmth, drawing strength from his unwavering presence. In that moment, the vision of my own wedding, once merely a joyous celebration, transformed. It became a stage, a platform, a precise, elegant instrument of justice. Their banishment of me from their weddings had been a declaration of war. My uninvitation of them from mine would be my victorious counter-declaration. And the mic, I promised myself, would be dropped with a resonance that would echo in their carefully constructed world for years to come, shattering their facade of perfection and control. This wasn't just about an empty chair. It was about a powerful, resonant silence that would speak volumes. The bridal shower debacle wasn't just another wound. It was the cauterizing flame that seared away the last vestiges of my longing for their acceptance. It was the moment the old Harper, the one who still held a flicker of hope for reconciliation, finally died. In her place rose a woman forged in the fires of their relentless disapproval, sharp and unyielding, ready to orchestrate her own justice. The turning point wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a quiet, internal implosion, a collapse of illusion followed by a fierce, undeniable clarity. I realized, with a chilling certainty, that their intention was not just to exclude me, but to diminish me, to make me doubt my worth. And that, I decided, was a battle I would not only refuse to lose, but would turn on its head. The days following Aunt Sylvia's chilling phone call were a blur of intense introspection. I stopped going through the motions of planning, of pretending this was just another wedding. This was my wedding, a testament to the life I had built, the person I had become. Despite them, every decision, from the choice of flowers to the seating chart, became imbued with a deeper meaning. It wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about authenticity. It was about defining my own family, my own circle, based on genuine love and respect, not on archaic notions of bloodline or social status. I spent hours poring over old photographs, not to wallow in nostalgia, but to analyze. There they were, Aunt Sylvia, perfectly coiffed, radiating an air of untouchable superiority. Uncle Jeff, a shadow at her side, his silent judgment a constant presence. My own face, younger, hopeful, then gradually hardening, fading to the periphery of family portraits. The images didn't evoke sadness. They evoked a profound sense of liberation. I saw the narrative they had constructed, the role they had assigned me, and I felt nothing but a fierce desire to burn it all down and build anew. Mark, ever intuitive, sensed the shift in me. He didn't question. He didn't pity. He just held my hand, listening patiently as I articulated the raw, visceral truth of my decision. They don't get to be part of this. Mark, I whispered one night, the words heavy with a quiet finality. Not after everything. Not after they tried to erase me. This wedding. It's not just about us. It's about what we stand for, and they don't stand for it. His response was immediate, unwavering. Then they won't be there. Harp, this is your day, our day. No room for anyone who doesn't see your brilliance. His simple validation was a balm to my soul, a testament to the unconditional love that had been so conspicuously absent in my formative years. The logistical aspects of the uninvitation were surprisingly straightforward. Our wedding was to be an intimate affair, not a grand spectacle. We were sending out bespoke invitations, not mass-produced cards. It was easy enough to simply omit their names. No dramatic phone calls, no fiery letters. Just silence. The same silence they had wielded against me for years. The irony was not lost on me. It was a subtle, elegant reversal of power. They wouldn't even know they were uninvited until the invitations for everyone else started arriving. The thought of their reaction, the confusion, the indignation, the sudden dawning realization was a quiet, simmering satisfaction. But the real turning point wasn't just the decision to exclude them. It was the decision to speak. For years, I had internalized their judgments, fought silent battles within myself. I had been the troublemaker, the rattlesnake. Now, I would choose my stage, my moment, and redefine those labels. My wedding wouldn't just be a celebration of love. It would be a declaration of self-worth, a public reclaiming of my narrative. The idea of the speech, the dropping the mic moment, began to form in my mind, not as an act of childish revenge, but as a cathartic release, a powerful statement of truth delivered with grace and conviction. It would be my closing argument, my final, unassailable piece of investigative journalism, presented to the very people who had once sought to silence me. I started writing, not a bitter diatribe, not a vengeful rant, but a carefully crafted address, weaving together themes of authenticity, chosen family, and the profound cost of conditional love. I wanted it to be impactful, not just for them, but for everyone else present. The friends who had become family, the distant relatives who had shown genuine kindness, the few family members who had tried, however feebly, to bridge the divide. It would be a testament to resilience, a celebration of finding joy on one's own terms, and a quiet, dignified rebuke to those who tried to dictate my worth. The process of writing was deeply cathartic. Each word was a brick in a new foundation, each sentence a strand in a new tapestry. It forced me to confront the residual pain, to acknowledge the wounds, but also to recognize the strength that had emerged from them. I realized I wasn't defined by their rejection. I was defined by my refusal to be defined by their rejection. The emotional discomfort was still present, a ghost of past hurts, but it was now overshadowed by a profound sense of peace and a fierce determination. I was no longer Harper, the banished. I was Harper, the architect of her own destiny, the curator of her own happiness, and on my wedding day, the world would see it. The dramatic tone, the carefully chosen language, the precise emotional arc. It was all coming together, not just for a story, but for the most important moment of my life. The last piece of the puzzle fell into place during a quiet conversation with Mark. He asked me, gently, "What do you want them to feel, Harper, when you say what you need to say?" I paused, considering, not anger, not shame, though that would be a natural consequence. "I want them to feel irrelevant," I said finally, the word tasting clean and true on my tongue. "I want them to realize that their power over me, their judgments, their exclusions, they mean absolutely nothing now, that their carefully constructed world has been irrevocably altered, and they're standing on the wrong side of the new truth." And that realization was the true turning point, the final decisive click into place. My revenge wasn't about bitterness. It was about radical self-acceptance and the quiet, devastating power of indifference. The air in the grand ballroom of the Hermitage Hotel in Nashville was thick with anticipation, a vibrant hum of laughter and whispered conversations. Sunlight streamed through the towering, arched windows, illuminating a kaleidoscope of rich fabrics and warm, inviting decor. Every detail, meticulously chosen, spoke of warmth, authenticity, and profound joy. This wasn't Aunt Sylvia's sterile, perfectly curated affair. This was my vision of celebration, a living tableau of the people who had truly embraced me, my chosen family. Mark, standing beside me, looked impossibly handsome, his eyes mirroring the fierce joy and calm resolve that had settled deep within me. This wasn't just our wedding day. It was the final act. The precise moment the years of quiet torment would culminate in a public, undeniable statement of my liberation. The ceremony itself was beautiful, tear-inducing, a heartfelt exchange of vows that sealed our unbreakable bond. It felt like a cleansing, a purification of the past. As the reception began, the energy shifted. The clinking of glasses, the soft murmur of conversations, the soulful strains of a jazz quartet. It was perfect. And then it was time. The moment for toasts arrived. My father, surprisingly, had delivered a genuinely touching speech, a rare moment of overt affection that almost made me falter. But the true mic drop wasn't for him. It was for me. I had opted to give a speech myself, a deviation from tradition that raised a few curious eyebrows, but I knew, intrinsically, it was essential. Mark squeezed my hand, a silent signal of support. I took a deep breath, walked to the mic stand, the hushed, expectant faces turning towards me. The room, filled with people I loved and trusted, felt like a powerful shield. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified just enough to carry to every corner of the vast room. "For those of you who know me well, you know I spend my life chasing stories, digging for truth, and sometimes challenging narratives. Tonight, I have a story to tell, not for a byline, but from the heart. It's a story about family, belonging, and the profound journey of finding your true home." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room, lingering on the faces of my friends who had become family, the few relatives who had stood by me, my parents, who despite their past failures were here now. Then I let my eyes drift to the empty table in the far corner, strategically placed to be noticeable by its emptiness. It was a table meticulously set but devoid of guests. The caterers had quietly informed me that the place cards for Aunt Sylvia and Uncle Jeff, along with a few others who had tacitly supported their ostracism, had simply been omitted. No big fuss, just gone. The elegant, stark absence screamed louder than any fiery accusation. "Tonight," I continued, my voice gaining a quiet power, "we celebrate not just the union of two souls, but the union of two families, and I want to acknowledge very specifically the people who are here tonight. You are the people who have seen me, truly seen me, for who I am. You are the people who have celebrated my triumphs and supported me through my struggles, without judgment, without condition." A ripple of warmth spread through the room. Guests exchanged knowing glances, a subtle acknowledgement of the unspoken truth. This was for them. My work as a journalist has taught me that truth, however uncomfortable, is always liberating. I pressed on, my eyes unwavering. My eyes. And sometimes the most profound truths are found not in grand pronouncements, but in quiet omissions, in the spaces left empty, in the invitations that never arrive. A collective intake of breath, a few gasps. My parents shifted uncomfortably, their faces a mixture of apprehension and dawning understanding. This was it, the moment. "For many years," I continued, my voice laced with a controlled sorrow, "I yearned for a certain kind of belonging, a familial acceptance that felt conditional. Conditional on my silence, conditional on my conformity, conditional on my willingness to be less than myself. I believed that love, true love, was meant to be unconditional. But in my own family, I learned that some bonds are forged in expectation, not genuine affection. I learned that some people value appearances more than authenticity. And they showed me, through their actions, through their deliberate exclusions from milestones that should have been shared, that I was not worthy of a place at their table. They told me, repeatedly, through their words and their absences, that I was a troublemaker, an unconventional spirit who simply didn't fit into their perfectly curated world. My gaze hardened, flicking again to the empty table, then sweeping over the faces of those who knew the history, who had witnessed my struggles. "Tonight," I said, my voice rising with a quiet but undeniable triumph, "I stand here, not as the banished, but as the architect of my own life, the curator of my own happiness. And I have chosen to build a table where only unconditional love is served, a table where authenticity is celebrated, not suppressed, a table where every seat is filled by people who uplift, empower, and truly cherish." A profound silence descended, broken only by the gentle clinking of ice in glasses. Every eye was on me, captivated. No one dared to interrupt. "They banned me from their weddings," I stated, the words resonating with a finality that settled deep into the room. "They made it clear I was not welcome, and in doing so, they taught me an invaluable lesson that true belonging isn't given, it's chosen, and that some absences, however painful at first, can become the most powerful affirmations of self-worth." I let the words hang in the air, a silent but palpable ripple of understanding passing through the room. I felt a profound lightness, a shedding of years of emotional baggage. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about liberation. It was about defining my own truth in front of everyone. So, tonight, as I celebrate this incredible new chapter with the man I love, surrounded by the family I have chosen, I want to say this: my worth is not up for debate. My authenticity is my greatest strength, and my table, this table, is full of love, joy, and acceptance. For everyone who truly belongs here. I paused, looking directly at Mark, then at my parents, who were now openly weeping, their faces a mixture of sorrow and, perhaps, pride. Thank you, I concluded, my voice thick with emotion, for being here, for being my true family. And with that, I finished, my voice dropping. I dropped the mic, and with a precise, deliberate movement, I took the microphone from its stand and gently placed it on the table, letting the soft thud echo in the stunned silence that followed. The crowd erupted in a roar of applause, a standing ovation that resonated with shared understanding, validation, and a palpable sense of triumph. Aunt Sylvia and Uncle Jeff weren't there, but their absence spoke louder than any presence, and their carefully constructed world had just been shattered, not by a bang, but by a microphone drop. The applause was a tidal wave, washing over me, cleansing years of accumulated hurt. It was the sound of vindication, of liberation, and of a profound, collective understanding. As the clapping died down, I saw my parents walking towards me, their faces streaked with tears. My mother pulled me into a fierce embrace, whispering, "Harper, my brave girl, I am so sorry. So sorry." My father, usually stoic, put his hand on my shoulder, his eyes red-rimmed. "You deserve to be heard, Harp. You always did." It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a magical erasure of the past, but it was a crack in the wall, a recognition of my pain that I hadn't expected. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope that perhaps, one day, we could begin to heal something. It was a tentative step, but a step nonetheless. The rest of the reception was a blur of genuine celebration. My chosen family, Mark's family, my loyal friends, and the few Lee relatives who had always championed my spirit, surrounded me with an outpouring of love and affirmation. There were no awkward silences, no forced pleasantries. The atmosphere was light, authentic, vibrant. It was the wedding I had always deserved, free from the suffocating judgment of the past. The empty table in the corner, once a silent statement, now felt like a relic, a monument to a closed chapter, quickly forgotten in the joyful din of the present. The aftermath of that mic drop rippled far beyond the ballroom. The story, naturally, spread like wildfire through the family grapevine. Aunt Sylvia, I heard through hushed whispers from distant cousins who were still in her orbit, was apoplectic. Her fury was legendary, but this time it was laced with a venomous humiliation. For a woman whose entire identity was built on controlling narratives and maintaining appearances, having her carefully constructed family facade publicly shattered by the troublemaker was an unbearable blow. She reportedly tried to rally support, to dismiss my speech as drama and attention-seeking. But the very public nature of my declaration, witnessed by so many who had long suspected her influence, made it difficult for her to regain footing. Uncle Jeff, typically her silent enforcer, was said to be uncharacteristically quiet, likely reeling from the unprecedented public challenge to their authority. In the weeks and months that followed, the family dynamic shifted irrevocably. Some relatives, previously on the fence, started reaching out to me, emboldened by my public stand. They offered quiet apologies for their complicity, shared stories of their own experiences with Aunt Sylvia's tyranny, and tentatively sought to rebuild connections. Others, particularly those deeply aligned with Aunt Sylvia's traditional values, remained aloof, their silence a clear sign of their disapproval. But it no longer mattered. Their judgment had lost its sting. Their silence was now just silence. My career, already thriving, received an unexpected boost. While I hadn't planned for it, a snippet of my speech, recorded by a guest and shared discreetly, went viral within certain circles. It resonated with countless others who had experienced similar familial rejections or struggles with authenticity. I was invited to speak at events, not just as a journalist, but as a voice for resilience and self-acceptance. It was a bizarre, almost surreal, twist of fate, but it affirmed that my story, born of personal pain, had a universal resonance. Life with Mark settled into a rhythm of profound happiness. Our marriage was built on a foundation of mutual respect, unwavering support, and an open, honest communication that allowed no room for the subtle manipulations I had grown up with. He was my anchor, my confidant, my fiercest champion. We started our own traditions, our own holidays, our own family, a vibrant, eclectic mix of friends and loved ones who celebrated us for exactly who we were. I never fully severed ties with my parents. Our relationship slowly, painstakingly, began to mend. There was an unspoken understanding now, a recognition of boundaries. They still visited. But Aunt Sylvia and Uncle Jeff were never mentioned, their names becoming a silent covenant of what was left unsaid. My father, in particular, seemed freer, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. My mother, too, seemed to breathe easier, no longer caught between her daughter and her formidable sister-in-law. Looking back, the path from banishment to triumph was long, winding, and often agonizing, but every exclusion, every slight, every moment of pain had, in retrospect, served a purpose. It had forged me into the woman I was, sharpened my voice, and clarified my vision. The initial bitterness had dissolved, replaced by a deep sense of peace and an unshakable confidence. I didn't need their approval to be whole. I didn't need their invitation to belong. My wedding day wasn't just a celebration of love. It was a revolution. It was the day I finally stepped into my full power, unafraid and unapologetic. The mic drop wasn't just a dramatic flourish. It was the resounding period at the end of a long, arduous sentence, declaring loudly and clearly my story, my rules, my life, and I am finally, unequivocally, free. The quiet satisfaction of that freedom, the profound joy of true belonging, far outweighed any residual sting from the past. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I wouldn't trade it for all the conditional acceptance in the world.